Shiki is a troubled, ugly teenager who is one bad day away from mag dumping his entire class. Unsurprisingly, he was expelled from his school for his bad behavior, mostly because he kept threatening to use his classmates as targeting practice. He tries to act like he doesn't care about the fact that he got expelled, but honestly, with the way his life is going right now, he knows he's probably going to be stuck flipping burgers at Mickey D's for the rest of his life. A few moments later, Shiki's dad comes charging into the room and smacks Shiki on the head because he just received the letter informing him of Shiki's expulsion. He can't believe Shiki went and got himself expelled from school like that, and he's so mad that he tries to smack Shiki again, but Shiki already adapted to the attack pattern, so he dodges and jumps back onto his bed. His dad calms himself down after that, but he still wants an explanation from Shiki because he wants to know why he was expelled. He also wants to know how Shiki managed to get all the guns he keeps in his room because having this stuff isn't cheap or legal for that matter. He tells Shiki he needs to stop acting like this before he ruins his life, but hearing that strikes a nerve with Shiki. So he yells at his dad and says he's glad they aren't related by blood because he'd never want to end up like him. That last part really hurts Shiki's dad's feelings, and Shiki knows he took it too far, but before either of them can say another word, the phone rings down in the liquor store Shiki's dad owns, so he heads down to answer it. When he answers the phone, he is surprised to find out that it's a large beer delivery order, but he doesn't get many customers, so he is happy to comply. He heads out in his car to make the delivery, and once Shiki sees him leave, he decides to try some target practice and starts muttering to himself about how he wishes things hadn't turned out this way. All of a sudden, he hears a loud crash sound outside his room, and a moment later, he gets dragged out onto the street by a rope of black mist. Shiki is incredibly disoriented by the fall, and by the time he realizes what's going on, a man named Samudare slowly walks out of the smoke, and he seems to know who Shiki is. Just then, a car comes out of nowhere to ram Samudare into a wall, and once he stops moving, Shiki's father yells for Shiki to get in immediately. Shiki doesn't question it and immediately jumps into his dad's car, but once they are presumably safe, he starts asking a lot of questions. First of all, he wants to know why some crazy man just dragged him out onto the street and why his dad was so calm about killing him with a car back there. Shiki's dad tells him that there's no way someone like Samudare would die from getting run over by a car. Shiki still has no idea what's going on, so his dad decides that it's time to tell him the truth. He informs Shiki that he is a descendant of the Oni, and Samudare is a descendant of Momotaro, which is why he is so hell-bent on hunting Shiki down. Shiki is so stunned that he doesn't know what to say, and there's a lot more to the story, but his dad doesn't have time to explain all the details because it looks like Sami has caught up to them. Black mist begins to surround the car, and it begins to break down, so Shiki's dad is forced to drive into a nearby abandoned factory so they can get out. After getting out, Shiki turns back and sees the car covered in that strange black mist from before, but before he can ask what that stuff is, the car goes up in a massive ball of flames. In all the chaos, Shiki's dad takes his eyes off Shiki for a second, and in that short time frame, Shiki's butt was kidnapped by the Samudare. Inside the warehouse, Samudare uses his black mist to restrain Shiki in the air. When he is asked why he is doing this, all he has to say is that all who possess Oni blood are nothing more than pests to be exterminated. Samudare is about to execute Shiki once and for all, but before that could happen, Shiki's dad shows up to stop him. As he walks in, he explains that all the legends of Momotaro and the Oni are true, and the battle has been raging on for millennia now. Across the generations, the descendants of Momotaro have all taken up the duty of eliminating the Oni, which is how the Momotaro Agency was formed. Shiki is still confused about all this, but his dad never expected a failure like him to understand immediately anyway. For now, he tells Shiki to just stay put and let him handle Samudare, but as soon as Samudare hears that Shiki's dad intends to challenge him, he creates two swords out of the black mist and charges in with astounding speed. However, Shiki's dad pulls out a mist blade of his own and blocks the attack. The black mist is a unique trait possessed only by the descendants of Momotaro. And here's where the dad lore deepens. Shiki's father was actually a former member of the Momotaro Agency who once worked alongside Samudare. His name used to be Tsuyoshi Momotogawa, however, he left that life behind a long time ago so he could raise Shiki away from the agency's eyes, but unfortunately he couldn't keep Shiki hidden forever. Samudare asks Tsuyoshi if he has forgotten just how dangerous Oni truly are, but Tsuyoshi doesn't want to talk about it. All he wants to do is protect Shiki. Tsuyoshi puts up a good fight against Samudare, but Sami eventually catches him lacking, and in an instant, Tsuyoshi's chest is cut open. He falls to the ground unconscious, and Shiki is horrified by what he just witnessed. He starts yelling at Sami for hurting his dad, so Sami turns to him and prepares to finish Shiki off. But with the last bit of strength he has, Tsuyoshi grabs his leg to stop him from getting to Shiki. Semi asks why Tsuyoshi would go so far to protect an Oni kid, but he says a father doesn't need a reason to protect his son. Shiki may not be the best student or person for that matter, and he may have Oni blood in him. But he has never hurt anyone before, so Tsuyoshi asks how Semi could possibly bring himself to kill an innocent child like this. Tsuyoshi's words sting because he has been having regrets about everything he has done lately, but he doesn't want to listen to this anymore, so he summons his sword and prepares to finish Tsuyoshi off. Shiki is helpless as he watches his father about to die at the hands of Sami, and the only thought going through his head right now is how much he wants to kill Tsuyoshi. Blood begins to drip from every orifice in his body as his mind is overcome with sheer hatred, and by the time Samudera turns his attention back to Shiki, he's no longer there. The next thing Sami knows, he hears the sound of several guns getting cocked next to his head, and he is so startled that he instinctively jumps back, narrowly avoiding the attack, but he still has no idea where Shiki is. Just then, he sees a drop of blood land on the floor, so he looks up and finds an awakened Shiki hanging off the ceiling. Sami can't believe Shiki was able to awaken his Oni abilities and control his blood in such a short time, but what truly makes Oni terrifying is the fact that they lack a sense of humanity, so they are unbelievably brutal. Sami readies his sword in preparation for Shiki's next attack, but once Shiki starts firing blood missiles at him, Sami realizes this is too much for him to handle and starts running away. He eventually manages to escape the blast radius, but that doesn't mean the battle is over because Shiki emerges from the smoke and kicks Sami so hard that he is knocked into a pile of rubble and is barely conscious now. Shiki then stands over him and unleashes every weapon he has stored in his arsenal at once. The warehouse is destroyed in the mayhem, but surprisingly, Sami managed to survive the attack, and even more surprising is the fact that Shiki suddenly transforms back into a human. Shiki is confused and wonders why his entire body is covered in blood, which is a normal response given the situation, and Sami plans to take advantage of the confusion to finish Shiki off before he transforms again. He begins charging towards Shiki, while repeating that all Oni must be eliminated with no exceptions. Shiki isn't able to control his transformation at will yet, so he's pretty much a sitting duck right now. However, as his blade is about to strike, Tsuyoshi jumps out in front of him and takes the hit instead. Semi can't believe that Tsuyoshi would go as far as to sacrifice his life for an Oni, but Tsuyoshi recalls the good old days he spent with Shiki, and he honestly doesn't mind dying here since he got to live a fulfilling life. Samudera has grown tired of this fight, and all the destruction they cause is starting to draw the attention of the crowd, so since the Momotaro agency must remain secret, Samudera withdraws for now and fades away into a mass of black mist. Once Samudera is gone, Tsuyoshi collapses into Shiki's arms and Shiki is really worried about him, so he says he's going to call an ambulance, but Tsuyoshi tells him that no hospital can save him at this point. It's only a matter of time before he dies, so he would like to talk to Shiki one last time. First of all, he apologizes for keeping the truth from him all this time, but it's not exactly an easy topic to bring up in conversation. Unfortunately, he won't be here much longer, so he can't offer much in the way of support, but he tells Shiki to make sure he gets stronger in the future so he can beat both the Momotaro group and Oni so he can live a truly free life. Shiki yells at his dad for talking as if he has already died because he doesn't plan on letting that happen. He begins carrying Tsuyoshi to the hospital, and seeing Shiki show so much concern for him puts a smile on Tsuyoshi's face. But his wounds are way too severe, so after taking a few steps, Tsuyoshi loses all strength in his body and collapses to the floor. Shiki desperately begs his father to get up because he still hasn't gotten a chance to apologize and make up for all the hurtful things he said about him this morning, but it's already too late because Tsuyoshi is gone. Shiki sits there for a moment and cries over his dad's corpse, but all of a sudden, someone rolls up behind him and says he can't stay here because there will be too many witnesses. Shiki is startled, so he prepares for another fight, but before he could even turn around, he gets chopped in the neck and is knocked out instantly. It takes a lot of skill to be able to sneak up on someone with roller skates on, so Shiki clearly never stood a chance against him to begin with. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Momotaro agency are all in an uproar because they just found out about Samudera's failed attempt to eliminate Shiki, and they are starting to wonder if he has gotten weaker. But given the situation, they can't blame him for withdrawing since they can't let the public find out about their existence. However, they also don't want the public to become aware of the existence of Oni, so they plan to kill Shiki as soon as they can get their hands on him. However, that's going to be nearly impossible now because after getting knocked out, he was taken to a remote island in the middle of nowhere, and the idea is to enroll Shiki in a school full of half-Onis just like him so he can train his abilities properly. But before that, NATO is going to need to do a thorough evaluation to find out whether Shiki is going to be useful or not, and I can already tell that it's not going to be a fun experience. Shiki wakes up and finds himself shirtless and tied to a chair while the man behind him is doing push-ups on his umbrella. That's a sentence I never thought I'd have to say, but somehow, this is nowhere near the strangest thing Shiki has seen so far. The man's name is Nato, and now that Shiki is awake, he says he will begin explaining what's going on. First, he reveals his horns to show Shiki that he is an Oni just like him, and after that, he tells Shiki that he was brought here for 2 reasons: evaluation and retrieval. As Shiki already knows, the Momotaro agency hunts down Onis like them using the Black Mist, and the man who killed Shiki's dad was one of them. Their goal is to ultimately exterminate all Oni in the world, so to oppose them, the Oni agency was formed, and Mato's job is to find recently awakened Oni like Shiki and figure out whether he is fit to join the Oni agency. That's pretty much it, so Mato takes his board back and unties Shiki's mouth so he can ask questions. However, as soon as Shiki can speak again, he immediately starts yelling at Naito and demands to know what they've done with his father. Mego is annoyed by all of Shiki's yelling, so he deducts a few points from the evaluation and tells Shiki that his father's body was safely stored within this facility, but the guy is dead right now anyway, so it's not important. Shiki begins squirming around and trying to get himself free, but that violent behavior kind of the whole reason that Naito tied him up in the first place, so he won't be releasing him yet. Shiki is incredibly mad, but he knows yelling isn't going to get him anywhere, so he takes a moment to cool down and calmly asks Naito to release him because he has a score to settle with the guy who killed his dad. However, while his voice may have been calm, Shiki's face still looks really angry, so Naito refuses to untie him. Besides, he knows there's no way Shiki would stand a chance against a Momotaro agent, but if Shiki is so intent on getting himself killed, then Naito has a better way to evaluate him. He takes off his tie, and before Shiki can even react, Naito has snuck up behind him and proceeds to strangle Shiki with it. Basically, Shiki has to find a way out of this to pass Naito's test, and if he can't do it, then he dies. Either way, Naito doesn't really care. Shiki refuses to let himself die at the hands of some roller skate-wearing jerk, so he struggles until blood begins pooling around his eyeballs. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it out in time, so he eventually passed out. Naito is totally prepared to keep strangling Shiki until he is officially dead, but with Shiki passed out, his subconscious takes over and he goes into Oni Berserker mode. The blood on the floor forms spikes that nearly clamp down on Naito, so he is forced to back away, and the second he takes his eyes off Shiki, he gets a machine gun pointed at his head. Shiki opens fire without hesitation, but when the dust settles, Naito is completely unharmed because he shielded himself using his blood umbrella. He can tell that Shiki hasn't learned how to control his blood powers yet because the only way he could fight was by going berserk, but this could be a good teaching moment, so Naito plans to subdue him as gently as possible. By the time Shiki regains consciousness, he finds his arm covered in blood while Naito is standing above him. He has no idea what just happened, and Naito had expected as much because when an Oni goes berserk, they lose all sense of self and destroy everything in their path, which is why this room is completely trashed right now. Shiki still doesn't understand a word that Naito is saying, and Naito is starting to think Shiki might just be stupid, but to make it as clear as possible, Naito sees Shiki as a graceless oaf who doesn't understand the first thing about controlling his blood, so he tells him he has been disqualified. Shiki is incredibly frustrated by the way things turned out, but despite all his anger, one thing is clear to him now. Naito is insanely strong, so he stands no chance of beating him. Acknowledging that hurts Shiki's ego, but he needs all the help he can get if he is going to face the Momotaro agency and get revenge for what they did to his dad. He swallows his pride and bows down to beg Naito to make him his student, but Naito is already fed up with Shiki, so he turns him down immediately. In battle, fighting without using your head means instant death, so someone like Shiki, who went berserk without thinking, would never last. He can't control his blood properly, and he's just plain stupid, so Naito doesn't want a useless student like him. Anyway, now that Naito has confirmed that Shiki is useless, he's going to have to dispose of him since he can let an incompetent berserker roam free. Shiki is stunned by what Naito just said, but from what Shiki has learned about Naito so far, he knows he's not joking, so he needs to act quickly if he wants to survive. Shiki turns around and runs away as Naito prepares his blood umbrella, but he knows he won't be able to escape before Naito attacks, which is why he begins charging at him. Naito thinks Shiki must have lost his mind since there's no way he can win a head-on confrontation. He prepares a wall of spikes to intercept Shiki, and in his head, he plans out all the possible moves Shiki could make here. He could either try to attack from the side, jump over, or retreat because he can't get through these spikes, and just as Naito had predicted, Shiki chooses to jump over the spikes. But what Naito hadn't anticipated was the fact that Shiki was able to create a gun mid-jump, so he blasts Naito in the head point blank. Shiki is proud of himself for managing to land a hit on Naito, But Nato wasn't actually injured by the blood bullet since he's still way stronger than Shiki. He is shocked that Shiki was able to control his blood, but he thinks it was just a fluke since from the looks of it, Shiki is on the verge of going berserk again. He doesn't want to have to deal with the gunslinging devil again, so Nato prepares his ultimate attack to finish Shiki off in an instant. However, to his surprise, Shiki actually manages to suppress his berserk mode and remains in control, so maybe it wasn't a fluke after all. Nato doesn't understand how Shiki managed to pull it off, so he asks Shiki for an explanation, and basically Shiki saw Nato using his ring to cut his finger so he could manifest his blood umbrella, and he just tried copying it to produce a similar effect. He pretty much just yelled at his brain to give him a gun, and eventually his arm turned into a gun, so it worked out well for him. Nato finds it hard to believe that such dumb logic was actually worked, but he can't deny that whatever Shiki did was effective. Normally, in order to avoid going berserk, an Oni would need to keep all their emotions under strict control at all times, so hotheads like Shiki usually have a hard time controlling their blood and go on a rampage. However, Shiki is different. It's more like he beat up all his emotions and made his berserk mode work for him. It's a crude method, but the power it allowed Shiki to use was certainly explosive. Shiki tells Nato that all he wants is to get strong enough to kill the man who killed his dad, so Shiki promises he will do his best to learn whatever Nato teaches him if he is willing to make him his underling. Shiki is being very sincere right now, and Nato can see that, but he still rejects Shiki's request. What Shiki did just now was nothing short of a dead man's gambit, and he had no backup plan ready in case he did end up losing control, so Nato still thinks he is incompetent. However, that doesn't mean Shiki is completely hopeless, so Nato has decided to take him in as a student after all, so he's canceling Shiki's execution. He won't explain what Shiki did to change his mind, but what's important is that he thinks Shiki has potential and he doesn't want to see that go to waste. The island they are on is called Onigashima, and at its center is a school built specifically for Oni, the Resetsu Academy. He tells Shiki that the academy is a military school which trains Oni to fight against the Momotaro Agency, but Shiki is more concerned about the fact that he's apparently on an island right now. Nato pokes Shiki in the face for talking about irrelevant stuff while he's still in the middle of his explanation, and then he goes on to state that he's the homeroom teacher at this academy, so from now on he will be in charge of Shiki and the other students. Shiki will have to live, train, and fight every other day so he can eventually handle the Momotaro agents, so he had better be ready. But Shiki's brain was overloaded by all the info Nato just dumped on him. There's still a lot that Shiki doesn't understand, but at the end of the day, he doesn't care what he has to do as long as he gets strong enough to get revenge. A little while later, Nato leads Shiki to a changing room so he can put on his new school uniform, and Shiki feels a bit odd since he didn't think he'd ever have to wear a school uniform again after he got expelled from his old school. Nato tells Shiki that there are a few other students in his class, but among all of them, Shiki is the weakest by far, so he better not pick any fights. By the way, Shiki asks Nato where his dad is, so Nato explains that they kept Shiki's dad's body in the morgue, and the arrangements for the funeral are his decision to make. Shiki's cheerful mood drops when he is reminded that his dad is dead, but Nato tells him there's no use beating yourself up over your regrets. Instead, he should focus on becoming stronger so he never has to experience that kind of regret again. With that said, Nato doesn't want to waste any more time standing around here, so he starts skating away and tells Shiki he only has 15 seconds to make it to class before he's late. Shiki doesn't think that's fair, but he doesn't have a choice, so he runs as fast as he can to catch up to him. They eventually arrive at the class door, and Shiki is trying to figure out what the coolest way to introduce himself to the class would be, but Nato hates wasting time like this, so he just kicks Shiki in and Shiki falls flat on his face, giving himself a nosebleed. Once Shiki realizes his nose is bleeding, he asks the first person he sees to give him a tissue, but Jin tells him to just shut up and be quiet. Jin's response pisses Shiki off, so he gets all up in Jin's face over it. Jin isn't the only other student in this class. There's Quina, Juji, Homer, and Akari, a day one crash out. But right now, Shiki couldn't care less about the others because he has a score to settle with Jin. Just then, Shiki and Jin suddenly find themselves sitting next to each other with Nato standing behind them, and neither of them could sense Nato move just now, so they are both scared stiff. However, Shiki still complains that he doesn't want to have to sit next to someone like Jin. Unfortunately, Nato couldn't care less about Shiki's personal beef, so he carries on with the class announcement and informs everyone that today they will be playing a game of tag. Shiki is confused and thinks tag might be some sort of code word in this school, but no, it's just a game of tag. Nato says the students will have to make their way through the forest and arrive at the goal in order to win, but Nato will be coming after them, and anyone he catches will be expelled on the spot. To make things a little fairer, he says he won't use his blood at all, while the students are allowed to use as much blood as they want. However, he warns that if they go berserk, then he will be forced to use his blood as well, and it won't end well for them. Jin asks Naito what happens if they accidentally kill him during this game, and Naito answers that if anyone is able to kill him, they will immediately graduate and get assigned to a unit of their choice, so they are welcome to try, but he won't make it easy. Everyone seems excited about the game now that they know about the rewards, but Shiki seems a little hesitant because he still isn't used to all this. However, a little discomfort isn't going to stop him from giving it his best shot, so he tells Naito to bring it on. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.